I want to welcome you to Rosewood Event Venue. I'm Jim Allen. I get the privilege and blessing to own this with my wife and my family. We can handle any event from weddings to baby showers to birthday parties. We actually take them up from birth. We get them married. We do the baby shower. We do the birthday parties. We do the graduations, anniversaries, celebration of life, quinceañeras, office parties, and then to what we're doing tonight. So this is a mission that we started a year ago. That we wanted to do things for clients. We wanted to do a panel. We thought about doing an advertising panel, and all of a sudden it just hit me. Our moniker or tagline is "Allow us to tell your story." So we said, let's just tell people stories. And we do websites, we do videos, we do graphics, we do business cards, we do branding, social media, we even do yard signs. Yeah. Do yard signs. Before I introduce you to tonight's speaker, I want to thank the people that have been on this stage before. Pastor Frank's here, Jim's here, Doug Sturbin's, my buddy's here, who's helped with this whole thing tonight. Thank you for coming. I want to thank the people that have come to this speaker tonight who hasn't been here. Thank you so much. Our speaker tonight is a lifelong Topeka and a local businessman. 15 years ago, his action caused irreversible harm. He has lived with consequences ever since. He is not here to justify himself or to ask for sympathy. He is here to tell a story of unfathomable divine work of unconditional forgiveness. Please welcome Marc Schultz.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out here tonight. It means a lot. It's a very powerful story that I've carried with me for 15 years. This white bicycle is located about 3.5 miles away from here. It's a memorial to a man named Tim Roberts. He was a husband, a father, a respected member of his community and of his church. On September 12, 2010, Tim was riding his bicycle down 53rd Street, and then he was hit from behind by an impaired driver and killed. I was that impaired driver. Six months ago, I decided to go back to visit this memorial. It's had a lot of changed meanings for me over the years. And the first few months after the accident, it really signified pain and shame and the carnage that I had caused. But now it has a different meaning, and I wanted to go sit with that. This is just west of 53rd and Fairlawn. One morning 6 months ago, I drove out there, wanted to sit down for 5-10 minutes and not be interrupted by anything. And as I pulled into Kent Street, where this is located, there was a car that was right on my tail, and I was like, oh great, I'm gonna have to turn around and come back some other time. So as I made my U-turn, hit the stop sign, I looked over and I noticed that the car that was sitting right where this photograph was taken was being driven by somebody I knew. I rolled the window down, and she rolled her window down, and our eyes met. Mark? Marisa? You see, this was Marisa Roberts. Now Marisa Schmerchek. This is Tim's widow. We both got out of our cars and we met in the middle of the road, and there we hugged. Now this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I caused this accident, and here 15 years later, I'm standing in the middle of the road with the widow, and we're embraced. I have to take you back 15 years earlier. This Sunday was a beautiful fall Sunday. The sun was shining, the weather was perfect. Marisa and Tim went to church that morning. They had lunch that afternoon. Tim took a nap and then decided after he was refreshed to go for a nice bike ride before they had evening Bible study. I was at home too. I hadn't gone to church. In fact, I hadn't been to church for decades. I gave up Catholicism for Lent when I was 18 years old and never picked it back up. I was at home actually nursing a resentment for my son's mom. She was off shopping with one of her friends in Kansas City, and I was left at home with my son. I was doing yard work, and while I was doing my yard work, I decided to have a few drinks. Any other typical day, that's what I would do. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I decided I needed to get gas, so I went and grabbed my son and said, hey, let's go get some ice cream. I threw my son in the car and buckled him in. I threw the gas can in the car, and I took off. At that time, we lived about a half mile north of 53rd and Fairlawn. I'm sorry, a half mile south of 53rd and Fairlawn. So as we made our way into town, I stopped at the stop sign and looked back, said, son, you buckled in, you ready for ice cream? Oh, did I get that gas can? And as I turned, I thought, well, I do have the gas can, but I had my phone on my leg. And I got a notification, and it fell off my leg. And as I was driving, I reached down and started fumbling around with it, trying to find it. And when I came up, the sun had shone behind my glasses. I was temporarily blinded. I suddenly heard, boom! My windshield shattered. I slammed on the brakes, I got out of the car, and I walked around the car to see what the damage was to my vehicle. You see, I just hit a deer. I wanted to know, what was this going to cost me? And as I rounded the front of my vehicle, I looked off into the weeds, and there was a bicycle with its wheels sticking up in the air, still turning. I panicked. I ran over to the bicycle, and right next to it there was a shadow of a man lying on the ground. He had a bicycle helmet on. He was covered with grass and dirt and blood. And I bent down to try to get a response out of him. He wasn't moving. Right at that time, I look over and I saw my son climbing out of the car. Alex, get back in the car, we've got to go. I ran and threw him back in the car in panic. Jumped in the driver's seat, put it in gear, turned around, looking through my shattered glass, called 911. By the time the dispatcher said, 911, what is your emergency? I was already sitting in my driveway. I said, I just hit a man on a bicycle over on 53rd Street. I had my son with me. I'm dropping him off at the neighbors and I'm going to come back. They said, stay there. I said, I'm sitting in my driveway right now. They said, stay there. Deputies will be there shortly. So I got out of the car, handed my son off to the neighbors, and I ran into the house. Started rummaging around in my medicine cabinet to find anti-anxiety medication because my anxiety was peak at that point. I didn't know what to do. Every time I had a crisis in the past or something was uncomfortable, I would medicate it away with alcohol or drugs or something. And this time it sounded perfectly logical. Take anti-anxiety pills. And I went to the refrigerator and grabbed the first thing I could find, and it was a bottle of wine that was open, and I slammed the bottle of wine on top of that, hoping to calm myself down. I was absolutely terrified at what I did, and what I saw, and at what was going to happen. Meanwhile, Marisa was waiting too. She was waiting for Tim to come home. 5 o'clock came around and he wasn't there. 10 after 5, he wasn't there. She called and he didn't answer. She left messages, he didn't call back. She got worried and decided to go find him. She knew where he rode. So when she drove up to 53rd and Fairlawn Road, it was blocked by a sheriff's deputy. She immediately got out of her car and asked the deputy if this accident had anything to do with the bicycle. The sheriff's deputy told her it had. She went back to her car. She got a picture of Tim. She found out right then and there that her husband was dead. She would have to wait 9 long months to hear anything about the man who had just killed her husband. While she was waiting, I went into panic mode. I went into damage control. I lawyered up. Sheriff's deputies came to my house and I didn't say anything about what happened, how I was driving. See, I was a criminal defense lawyer at the time, so I knew what had to happen. I knew what I needed to do to protect myself, and I buried my head in the sand about the actual humanity of people that I just impacted. At that point, it was all about protecting me and my family. I was taken to get my blood drawn. Through a series of unfortunate events around that I'm not going to share with you tonight, I was released back home. And that night, I was still anxious, I was still scared. Went and grabbed another glass of wine, and I drank it. I went outside. I looked up into the heavens. So God, I didn't believe it. Take this from me. I can't do this anymore. The next day, I got a text message from a friend of mine. I've been in and out of the AA world, recovery world, because of my DUI offenses and whatnot, and I resisted it all the time. This guy was a good friend, and he really cared about me. He said, would you like to go to a meeting? Right then, I thought, this is what I need to do. I need to lean into this because I'm going to be going in front of a judge, and I need to show that I've got a handle on what the problem was. So I kept thinking that, it was the alcohol was the problem. If I fix that, everything's going to be okay. So every day I went to one of these meetings, sometimes several times a day. But I was there out of fear. I wasn't there out of being willing to learn anything about it. I heard some good stuff in there, but that wasn't the reason why I was there. Several months later, I'm driving home from work, and I got a phone call from my attorney. He said, Mark, are you somewhere where you can sit down? If you ever have an attorney tell you that, I'm sorry, you're going to want to find a place to sit down because nothing good's going to come. He said, the DA's office got your blood, and because of your criminal history, they want to charge you, and you're facing probably 34 years in prison. My heart sunk, and I got scared. And I said, try to get a better plea agreement, otherwise we'll just go ahead and take this to court, we'll fight this. Got off the phone with him, I sat there in silence, on the side of the road. My chest starting to bounce, and I started to cry. Something had me reach over into my glove box and pull out a CD. Now, several weeks after the accident, my sister, who's a Christian, actually handed me this CD, and it's not something that I would ever have listened to. It's a gospel music CD. But something said, you need to pull that thing out and listen to it. So I popped it into the deck. And I heard the refrain, please forgive me. And every time I heard that, I would get more and more emotional. And I was crying, and it was so powerful, but I didn't understand it. A few weeks later, after I had listened to that music and I had said, please forgive me, I didn't know what I was wanting forgiven. I didn't know who was going to forgive me. I just knew that felt right at the time. A few weeks later, my attorney had told me that we got a favorable plea agreement. You're now only facing 4 to 5 years. I thought, well, that's That's something that I can handle. Let's take that. So April 11, 2011, I walked into the courtroom. Not this time as an attorney, but as a defendant. 6 hours after they filed charges against me. Keep in mind, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I didn't look at any of the evidence against me. I just pled to those charges as they were. But again, I wasn't pleading guilty and I didn't plead guilty to assume responsibility. I pled no contest because that had some major legal ramifications to me on down the road. So I was still being selfish and self-centered, but at least I didn't have exposure of 34 years. The judge found me guilty and set sentencing for June. I walk into sentencing on June 2nd, 2011. And I sit down to listen to this family that I completely disregarded. This family that I didn't even know existed. I didn't try to find out who they were. I listened to a widow tell the judge how hard it was for them to be without their husband. The void that was in their life because of my actions. And the fact that something had to be done, I needed to have consequences, which I fully respected and I expected. One by one, I listened to 4 daughters tell the judge that they wouldn't get to lean on their father for advice, they wouldn't get to hug him, he wouldn't walk them down the aisle. He wouldn't hold his grandkids. You see, because I was a lawyer, I had prepared a statement that I was going to give to the judge. I was going to tell him all of the things that I had done after. And something stopped me from doing that. In fact, I totally forgot that I was even going to be going up to speak after I heard these girls testify. The last person to testify, sorry about that. The last person to testify was Tim's father, Foster. Now what I expected, because I'm the father, was for him to say, you know what, Judge, I want my pound of flesh. This man needs to go to prison for the rest of his life. There's nothing that you can do that's going to end up paying back what this man took from us, but he didn't. Even though he had to bury his son 9 months earlier because of me, what he did was make a statement about society. He said, something's got to change. You know, we glorify drugs and alcohol, and then when somebody falls prey to that message, we want to demonize them. And I thought, this is kind of different. How does this happen? So the judge eventually said, Mr. Schultz, do you have anything that you want to say? And I stood there in silence. And it was long enough that my attorney got uncomfortable and he elbowed me and he said, hey, you need to tell the judge that you haven't had any drugs or alcohol for the last 9 months. Why does it matter? Judge, for what it's worth, I haven't had any drugs or alcohol for the last 9 months, but that's not going to bring Tim back. I looked back at the family and I said, I am so sorry. You will never know what happened that day. I didn't see him, and I'm so sorry. I told you that would make it about me, and this is about Tim today. I looked at the judge, and I didn't expect this to come out of my mouth. I said, Judge, you do whatever you believe is best. And that was it. The judge imposed sentence, and he gave me the maximum that he could. It's 5 years and 2 months. Another thing that he did was he let me walk out of that courtroom without shackles on. And as I walked out of that courtroom, through those double doors, there stood Foster Roberts. He was standing there with a look of compassion on his face. And I looked at him and I said, "I'm so sorry." And he grabbed me and he hugged me. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Mark, I forgive you. Now go get yourself well." I learned later that I saw Jesus Christ in that man. You see, I knew that he was a Christian. So when I went into prison, I asked for a Bible, and I spent 5 long years reading this Bible that they gave me, trying to find out what it was about the Jesus that he knew that I didn't know from any of my training, any of my upbringing, or anyone in my life. I spent time in this book, and I understood finally. 2 years into my sentence, I was baptized. I hadn't planned on being baptized. I didn't really know what that meant, but it felt right. So when I got out of prison, I was looking for a place to go to church. Since I hadn't been to a Catholic mass in a long time, I didn't really want to go there. And I don't know if you know this, but in Shawnee County, there's over 250 houses of worship. Or at least there was back then. There may even be more. It seems like a church plant pops up all the time, like Dollar Generals. So the first church that I go to outside of the one that was connected to the minister or the pastor that came to me in the jail was the church that Marisa Roberts and her family attended. Wow. I walked in there and I met Pastor Frank, and he welcomed me, and I filled out the cards, and I went and enjoyed the service, and then I left. And it was only then that I found out that that's where Marisa and her family goes. And I thought, that's bad form. I thought it was an insult for me to walk into their church after I got out of prison, adding insult to the injury that I'd already caused to them. And then there was that other selfish part. It was a violation of my parole. I could not have any direct or indirect contact with any of the family members. That Saturday, I got a phone call from Pastor Frank, and he was wanting to follow up on my experience. And as he was telling me about the programs that are available, I said, "Pastor Frank, I need to stop you right there. I have a connection with your church that you might want." He said, "Mark, I know who you are." He said, "When you walked into my church, I knew that was the Holy Spirit at work." He said, "Marisa heard that you had a conversion in prison. She wants to welcome you to this church. I welcome you to this church." I said, "Well, that's great, but I still have parole conditions and I can't come to this church until they're lifted." And he said, "Well, how do we fix that?" I said, "I don't know. I call my parole officer and I don't know, here's their number." So I gave him the number. And he said, "One last thing. Can I get your address? Marisa wants to send you a letter." So I gave him my address and I went on my way. That next Sunday, I went to church at another place here in town. And I found out that church is where Tim Roberts' partner in business attends. And in fact, when I walked in there, I was greeted by the wife of the man that took over his contracts. I told her about Foster forgiving me when I walked in the prison. She went, gathered everybody up and brought them out to me. And they all gathered around me and they forgave me. And they put their hands on me and they prayed for me. And I was thinking, how does that happen? I received Maurice's letter in the mail a few days later. I opened it up, it was handwritten, about 3 pages long. It was heartfelt. She was very, very candid about how hard it was for her to accept what I had done and to forgive me while I was in prison. She confided in me that it took about 2 years into my prison sentence for her to forgive me. And I thought, well, that's a coincidence because 2 years into my sentence, I was baptized. She didn't know that until I got out of prison. I thought, well, how does that happen? A couple of weeks later, I went to my parole office. And I walked into this office, and my parole officer's sitting there behind her desk. She's got a look of irritation on her face. Because usually when I would walk in, I'd sit down and I would end up taking the whole hour just talking about myself and the things that are going on. I was happy to be there. She'd get irritated because she had criminals she had to actually keep track of. And she said, for the last couple of weeks, I've been getting these phone calls and messages from Pastor Frank and the widow Marisa asking to release those no contact orders. She slid a document across the table at me and said, go to church. We've modified your conditions. There's no longer a no contact order. And I was thinking, how does that happen? I don't understand this. Marissa's letter gave me the phone number for Foster Roberts. I was able to call him and set up an appointment to go see him. He was in a nursing home in Ottawa. So I drove down to Ottawa and made my way to his room. I go to open the door. It's cracked a little bit. I poke my head in and I knock. Foster. And he's sitting on the edge of his bed and he turns and catches my eye and his eyes light up. Big smile on his face and he says, Pastor Todd, this is the man that I was telling you about. Got up off his bed, motioned me in. Before I could make my way all the way in the room, he grabbed a hold of me and he hugged me. Big smile on his face and tears coming down his eyes. And he said, I'm so happy that you were baptized. And I thought about that moment, the last moment I had with Foster Roberts. As I was standing in the middle of the road, hugging Marisa, standing right by this bicycle. I was thinking about my thoughts of forgiveness. I didn't understand what was going on because, you see, I used to think that forgiveness was something that you withheld until there was acknowledgement and contrition and some sort of restitution that the person that you were going to forgive needs to do something to earn it. And if you think back about that 9 months from the accident to sentencing, I had done nothing but be selfish. I didn't reach out to the family. I didn't do anything to deserve any forgiveness. But Foster forgave me anyway. Marisa forgave me anyway. What Foster showed me and what Marisa later confirmed is that forgiveness is not a gift for the one forgiven. It is not a reward for the one that's forgiven. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It doesn't eliminate consequences. I still had to go to prison. I'm still a convicted felon. I still don't have my law license back. I still have consequences to face because of my actions 15 years ago. But what they understood is that forgiveness for them was freedom. And what I understood is that forgiveness for me was permission. Permission to go and get myself well. And I also know that all of this was coordinated by the Holy Spirit, because how else can you explain all of that? How did this happen? Something outside of us was coordinating all of this. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for listening.